John here from Ripewave Audio, and for today's video we continue our super review of 4 models of AV receivers from Denon Marantz, all of which support a 7.4.4 speaker configuration, which all support the popular immersive sound modes of Dolby Atmos, DTS:X, and Aural 3D, all which have 9 channels of internal amplification, all of which have room calibration, Audyssey, which is built in, and Dirac Live, which is a paid upgrade. But how are these different? And today's focus is on the sound quality using external amplifiers. And how are these different despite a wide range of prices? And we start with the Denon AVR X3800H, which is right here. This sells for $1,700. Then we move up to the Marantz Cinema 50, which is $2,500, $800 more. Then also for $2,500 is we have the Denon AVR X4800H. And finally, at the highest price, the Marantz Cinema 40, which comes in at $3,500. The difference between the entry model from Denon, the 3800H, and the Cinema 40 is $1,800. Does that difference in price, whether you're spending $800 more, $1,000 more, or $1,800 more for an AV receiver from these brands from the same company, Denon Marantz, owned by common ownership, does that get justified in the price? Now, if you watched our previous video, we went over the differences between these as far as a feature set. We found that the main difference was between tiers. So you have your Marantz Cinema 50 and your 3800 in the first tier, and you have your Cinema 40 and your 4800 from Denon in the second tier. And those really set the feature set between these two. And when you did move up to the higher grade, you did get additional HDMI inputs. You got some other capabilities, including when you looked inside of these, that you saw an upgraded power supply. You saw heat sinks that were larger. You saw boards that were designed differently between the two tiers in products, and there were some subtle differences between Denon versus Marantz, and those are all covered in the first video. But in today's video, we're going to take a look at what makes these different sonically. Now, to get these all on the same page, we ran Audyssey calibration for all of them in a very consistent way, which meant redoing the Audyssey calibration that we performed in the first series of videos, which we did very quickly. And at the time, these were interfering with the sonics of the room. So what we did was we also moved them from these display that you have seen here in the video, so that it wouldn't interfere with the speakers, particularly the center speaker, which is currently hidden behind 2 of these models. And we were careful about doing these with a similar noise floor, have everything quiet in the room. We had it set up so that that we did all our microphone positions in the same. We did these all in the same day, so we could better assure that we were doing things with consistency. And then when we were done, then we did some of our comparisons. We did this with Audyssey turned on and off, and we did it with 2 channel modes as well as surround sound modes. And we'll get into all of that. The other thing that we did is we ran Dirac for the Cinema 50. Now, the Cinema 50 is the unit that we've owned since the fall. It's been our long-term evaluation. We brought these in to really see how these products that seem very similar on paper, how they result in what you experience in your living room or home theater. Now, the one part that we haven't got to yet is the internal amplifiers. We'll be covering that in a future video while we still have all of these. But Dirac Live, it's a paid upgrade, as we mentioned earlier. There's two versions of Dirac that you can get. You can get the limited bandwidth version, which really only goes between 20 hertz and 500 hertz, so the lower frequencies, so tuning out your subwoofers and how that integrates with your other speakers. Does impulse response correction. You can edit the target curves. You can do multiple playback modes. And that's part of that limited bandwidth version, which sells for $259. And it's tied to each individual unit. So I can't just buy one license and have it apply to all of them. I can't transfer the license from my Cinema 50, as far as I know, to the Cinema 40 or any other model. But if you want to move up to the full version, the full bandwidth version, which goes and evaluates on frequencies between 20 and 20,000 hertz, doing the same type of calibration, you're going to pay $100 more at $349, well, $90 more. And you can upgrade if you start with the limited bandwidth to go to the full bandwidth for $99 extra. So you pay an extra $9 if you do it in phases versus buying the full all at once. But we have the full version. We have it applied to the Cinema 50, so we can give you a relative difference between the Cinema 50 running in Audyssey versus Dirac Live. So we'll get into that in a bit here. Let's talk about how it stores these profiles. Now, if you remember from our Onkyo video with the TX-RZ50, you couldn't listen to the AccuEQ, which is Onkyo's proprietary room calibration system, and Dirac at the same time. In fact, one wipes out the other and you have to recalibrate, and you only have one active calibration system at a given time. The good thing about Denon Marantz is we have two speaker presets. One preset can be defined to hold an Audyssey calibration and another one Dirac, or you could use both presets for Audyssey and both presets for Dirac, but it gives you that flexibility. Furthermore, when you do Dirac, you have up to 3 filters that you can apply. So with Dirac, you could essentially have 6 different filter calibrations. It would be one measurement session. And when you do Dirac, you have a choice of how many microphone positions you want to do, whether it's narrow, focused, or broad. And that's going to determine whether you have 9, 13, or more microphone positions when you're doing your measurements. And it's designed as you get wider if you want to have it sound better for more listening positions in the room. So you could have essentially 2 Dirac configurations, one for a focused, where you're sitting, with the main listening position, and then one for wide when you have a lot of people in the room, and that could be your 2 speaker presets, for example. But in our case, we use one for Audyssey and one for Dirac with the Cinema 50. Now, as we were running through the Audyssey calibration, one of the things that Marantz and Denon do with Audyssey is it does a phase check of your speakers. And when it does this, it will identify which ones it believes to have your positive and negative terminals reversed. Now, I have experienced this where it's reporting a phase error when I've double-checked, triple-checked the wiring on my speakers, and I believe the wiring is correctly wired. So I don't believe it is always identifying the phase correctly. When you're at that phase of the calibration, it will also report something else. It's not just phase on this phase, and this is where it could get confusing. If it's only phase errors you're facing, you can hit the ignore button and move forward. If you don't see the ignore button, it probably means that one of your speakers was not detected. So I had a case where actually the subwoofer power cord, and this happens to me occasionally, vibrates actually out of the wall socket. And so it wasn't detecting the subwoofer. And since it wasn't detecting the subwoofer, it wouldn't continue on with the calibration, which is a good thing. And one of the times I forgot to turn on one of my amplifiers, and it wasn't naturally running the ceiling speakers. So again, it wouldn't move forward. It would detect that as not measurable. So if that is the case, you need to correct that error, plug in your subwoofers, make sure all your amplifiers are turned on correctly, and then go back and have it retest. If it still comes up with phase errors, that's okay. You can ignore them if you feel comfortable that you have your wiring correct. So that is the issue on the phase settings. Now, Denon Marantz continue to make some improvements on the menus and all that. One area I think they could still improve upon is how things are labeled and organized. I find myself having to go in and out different menus for what I believe to be similar things. For example, if I'm going to set up Audyssey or Dirac, I go into the speaker menu. Now, I don't necessarily find that to be a speaker setting, but okay, they put it under speakers. If you want to adjust parameters associated with Dirac or Audyssey, it's not in the speaker menu, it's in the audio menu. And this is where you can go in and adjust Audyssey MultEQ, either being on and off, dynamic EQ, which is like their loudness control that applies it differently for different volumes, turn that on and off, and then dynamic volume, which is doing a form of compression for television types signals. And then Dirac, it's where you get to select a filter 1, filter 2, filter 3, or off. And these are in totally separate menus. Now, one might argue that the configuration is an advanced function, but just give me it as an advanced function under the same menu tree. It's, to me, not intuitive the way they have these organized in the menus. I also noticed when using the mobile apps, whether that was the Denon or the Marantz apps, or the Audyssey app, which you can do your calibration through, did it display all the options? In fact, the Audyssey app didn't display my speakers correctly, so I have ceiling speakers versus height speakers, but it always seemed to want to show height speakers, so I reverted back to the on-screen display because it was just matched exactly what I wanted. I didn't want to have any errors happen there. So I am having some consistency issues with the mobile app with these configuration. So let's talk about, and we ran through each of these with Audyssey and with Dirac for the Cinema 50. I wanted to see some consistency of what it's coming up with distances, with levels, and for crossover points. Because after all, we're using the same speakers, we're using the same amplifiers, we got it in the same room. We're being as consistent as possible. Our feeling is it should be calibrating these things as consistently as possible. Now, rather than put in your distances manually, these room calibration systems figure out the speaker distances. But what it really is doing is trying to work out timings so that when the sound leaves the speaker and gets to your ear, regardless of what speaker it is, it's all arriving at your ear at the same time. And so it's really doing time alignment versus distance. But it's the distance based off the speed of sound that really determines this. What we did find is that it was extremely close. So running Audyssey on all these, there was only a slight deviation between these as far as different distances. So we've got it within 1/10 of a foot. We're measuring in U.S. customary units. 1/10 or 2/10 of a foot. Where it deviated the most widely was the distances that Dirac assigned to the subwoofers. I mean, this is quite different. So Dirac reported, now I also want to point out with Dirac, it's not reporting it in feet, it's reporting it in milliseconds. In Audyssey, you see it in feet. Dirac, you have it in milliseconds. But if using the speed of sound, 1,125 feet per second, we can convert that to a distance. Now, this is a relative distance between speakers in your configuration. So Dirac will report one as, let's say, 0 milliseconds, and I use that as the reference point. So I just realized that the left speaker is it's saying it's 1.4 feet different than the center speaker, which it reported as 0 millisecond delay. And if I look at what Audyssey reported at, something around 13.1 feet for the center speakers. So if I equate that, I can approximate the distance and do, in my table here, a comparison. And it did come out pretty close to what Audyssey was. But for the subwoofer output, it was reporting the subwoofers at 12 and 12.2 feet from the main listening position. Now, actual measured distance, if I used a tape measure, it comes out to 7 and 8 feet for these. Audyssey reports these as around 9.2, 9.4 feet, but Dirac reports it as 12 feet. So Dirac, it says, as far as timing, it's a lot slower getting to your ears. So I am going to make those adjustments as if it was really closer. So it's compensating to what it believes is a slower arrival to your ears. Whether Dirac is more correct or Audyssey is more correct, may have to do some digging, but there's clearly a difference there. Levels. I was surprised to see so many variations in levels. After all, level matching your speakers really shouldn't have much to do with the technology you're using for room correction calibration. Why would these not be within a few dBs or even a fraction of a dB from each other? But they are. We can see some of these off a dB and a half, 2 dBs in some cases in how it's configured. And I would be okay if some were relatively just a dB higher or 2 dB lower for all the speakers across the board. But in some cases, it's picking out one speaker and having that different, but the other one's very similar. So I'm just pointing out these differences in how they're calibrating it. I think it speaks to the variability in running the test. I bet if I ran the test again, I might come out with different levels for one versus another. Do you go back in and manually set some of these levels to what you're more comfortable with? Now, I have somewhere around here is my spatial audio calibration CD, which can go and help you get consistent levels, and I may just do that to just keep things a little more organized. And then finally, with crossovers. Now, I recently had somebody write into the channel and explain how great it is that Denon and Marantz have changed their convention on crossover settings. They used to say small and large, and now it just says full, or it has the crossover value. So full means there's going to be no crossover point. It's going to send all the full frequency signal to that particular speaker. And if there's a value in there, 40, 60, 80, etc. hertz, then that's equivalent to what used to be small. When we did this, what we found out was Audyssey made the settings very consistent, and actually consistent across the board. It always took the front stage, front, left, and center, and set them to full. It always took the side, back, rear surrounds, whatever you call them, and set them to 40 hertz, and it always took the ceiling or height speakers and set them to 60 hertz. Now, I don't know if that's just because of my room or it just always does that. The Dirac calibration on the same unit with the same configuration, Didn't do the same thing on the front speakers. Now, it did set the front left speaker to full, but it set the front center and right to 40 hertz. This is kind of odd. The surround sides and back are set to 40 hertz as well as the ceiling. So 40 hertz for everything except for the left front. Now I find this kind of odd, and I do find their crossover points may be a little low. And again, this might be something I want to play around with. I don't have a high degree of confidence that what they've put in here for crossover points with the auto calibration is the best configuration. So this we'll continue to play with, but what we're going to do is out-of-the-box experience here. When it comes down to listening, we found that this was very music dependent. Listening to a wide range of material is really important. In some cases, you'll be listening to a song and they almost sound the same when you're switching between one model to the next. But you go to another song and you can clearly see the difference. Sometimes instruments like acoustic guitars or bass, and it could be electronic bass, that really help differentiate this. I also found that sometimes when you're listening to lower quality material versus these real audiophile discs, that you may actually hear a greater difference between models. So listen to a lot of different source materials. I did find very consistent results. It wasn't like when I switched from acoustic jazz to electronic music that I said, oh, now this other model sounds better. The other thing I noticed is two-channel versus surround sound or immersive listening. When I'm listening to immersive, the differences became more pronounced. Now, the other thing I did was I disabled dynamic EQ or loudness, so we're listening to things as it's coming out normally and not with any boost or cut for any of the frequencies. A/B tests were extremely important. These models, in some cases, were so close in their sonic output that unless I was doing a split section change, A to B or to C, would I have remembered the difference? Now, on the lower tier models, I had that mental memory. But when you get into the upper tier models, it was a lot harder. So what did I hear? Now, there's different ways of going about these listening tests, and different reviewers have different methodologies. I find when I listen to equipment, I think about it in two dimensions. One is, what I'm hearing, does it sound thin or rich? So thin, it's sort of like the megaphone like this, would be like thin, and then rich would be what would sound more natural and warm to me. Confined or spacious. So confined, it means that the sound stage is narrow. Spacious means it's wider or more natural sounding. And these are the two kind of qualities that I'm listening for. I don't really attribute to different wine type categories of sound that others might use. And these are a bit subjective listening tests. And as I said, a lot of these sound very similar. Unless I was doing the close ABC, in some cases, I don't think I would remember one versus the other. There are a couple of instances, though, where I can definitely hear a difference and memorize that difference. And I would say that the entry-level products, the Cinema 50 and the Denon X3800H, are ones that clearly, when I listen to those, I feel something is lacking. It's really obvious when I'm listening to them. Now when I move up to the next tier, the Cinema 40, the 4800, I feel like that's been restored. Now, there is an exception here. The Cinema 50, when I apply Dirac, it starts to get into a little more rich, a little more spacious. It's really just crossing that line where I feel like, hey, this is kind of what I expect for it to sound like. So I believe that Dirac is helping in these cases. I believe that each of these could shift to the right and up, more spacious, more rich, slightly with Dirac versus Audyssey. There is a clear difference there. So it is an upgrade that I recommend. Yes, you're paying more for your unit, a few $100s more, because you're getting that Dirac license. But I think that a lot of you would notice that difference. That's my first point. No matter which model you settle on here, if it's one of these four or another brand, another model, certainly if it has the capability of doing Dirac, I would utilize it and I would pay more for it. Now, there may be alternate ways. Now, some of you have been writing in is you do your own room calibration. If you possess these skills to do your own calibration without the use of Audyssey or Dirac or something else, then don't worry about it. But if you just want the AVR or the tool to do it for you, then Dirac over Audyssey, yes. I do believe that it's worth the investment in those cases. Now let's talk about the other models. And it's not just the ones that you see in front of me here, but we also have our Emotiva RMC1, which is up here. We have the Onkyo TX-RZ50, which we returned recently, but we were able to test against these four while everything was here. And then we have the Anthem AVM 70, which we only have comparisons against the Cinema 50 and the RMC1. Just a matter of when they were in our studio at the same time, but certainly having the RMC1 and the Cinema 50 always here, we always have those common reference points, and I like having at least two in-house at different kind of calibers and price points, just to have that in mind. So looking at this chart that I've assembled here, from a price point standpoint of view, there are really no surprises here. Unfortunately, when you pay more, you get more. So it's not like there's one out of the lot that's a real value that, boy, you know, it sounds better and you pay less. In all these cases, when you pay more, you get more. So, for example, the 3800 is the lowest cost, had the lowest performance. Then it went up to the Cinema 50. Even the Cinema 50 with Dirac enabled, to me, did not sound as good as the next tier up. And when you get into that next tier up, this is the Onkyo TX-RZ50, the Denon AVR X4800H, and the Marantz Cinema 40, really splitting hairs here. And I've shown these kind of looking like one's better than the other, but I couldn't really put the squares on top of each other in the diagram. So these are really similar. I think if you were in the room with me, you might have put 5 on top of 3 and just had a different order to these things. So keep that in mind. I think at this point, when you look at this grouping, the Cinema 40, the X4800, the Onkyo TX-RZ50, really come down to preference. Is the user experience important to you? Do you think that having the, let's say, the Marantz look or the Cinema 40 with its lights on the side, are you willing to pay a few $100s more for those cosmetic elements? And that's what it's really going to come down to. So preference. Some of you don't like the porthole design. Some of you love it. Definitely Denon is in a different class there. When you feel the volume and the input knobs on the 3800, they're not as good a quality as what's on the 4800. I think it comes down to a lot of that. Now, I will say my recollection of the AVM 70 is it's a notch higher than the 4800 and the Cinema 40. But again, I didn't have them in the same room. I do have the RMC 1 in the same room. Now, I will say, with the upper tier Denon Marantz, it's getting close to the RMC 1. The RMC 1 is still, more expensive than the others. They do have the RMC 1L, and they have the XMC 2, which then becomes a harder story, but then it's a processor, and you have to buy all external amplifiers. Now, I did say these things follow essentially the price. When you pay more, you get more. And the Anthem AVM 70 is also a processor separate. The real outlier is the Onkyo TX RZ50. So for around $1,600, you've got something of the caliber of the Cinema 40, which is $3,500, and the 4800, which is $2,500. But you're also getting Dirac Live included. So that is a huge advantage. So if you're not into the particular, the brands, if you don't have the brand loyalty to Denon Marantz, if you don't have this natural draw to the Marantz look and feel, the Denon look and feel over the Onkyo is the real value here. So this is my general assessment of these from listening with external amplifiers and a like configuration, and this is how I grade them. What are your thoughts? Do you have a different experience? I know some of you have had multiple products, multiple brands. You've tried them in-house. You send in notes that you feel like one sounds better than the others. I think mostly I've been aligned with some of your assessments. But weigh in here. Put your thoughts in. Is these series of videos helping you? That feedback would be useful to the Ripewave audio community. We're going to come back to and look at the internal amplifiers in the next video. If you want to take your involvement to the next level, you can look at our Patreon channel at www.patreon.com/Ripewave, or you can hit that one-time donation, the thanks button. That would really help our channel. Do these things. Bring more models in. Do these comparisons in a bigger way. Always, you can hit that bell notification so you're informed when the next video is posted. Until then, keep evolving your audio experience.